Wonderful. So, with that, a very warm welcome, a good morning, good early morning for some of you, a good afternoon for others. It's a pretty global group ranging from over here in Europe, where I'm based as well in Switzerland, all the way over to Asia for this session on demonstrating training effectiveness, how to make this bane into a boon. And as you can see, those of you who are just joining now, we've already kind of warmed up a little bit with a little check-in activity just to kind of see how people who are joining us today actually feel about training evaluation, whether we love it, whether it's not at all our cup of tea, little experience, or very experienced. And it doesn't really matter where you stand. I think what we'll try and do today is just kind of look at a couple of very simple, or I'll let you then judge, simple approaches that can help us make training evaluation hopefully more fun, but also more easy, or help us to kind of get started. So if you're just getting started with evaluation, hopefully some useful ideas on how to get started. If you already have some experience, maybe kind of an opportunity to reflect on whether what we are doing is actually working. So let me just kind of remove all these annotations so that we kind of can get started. Yeah. So very briefly, maybe I'll just kind of go back to the introduction slide. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Melanie. I'm going to keep my introductions very short. You can look me up on LinkedIn and Google and find out more about me. But I think maybe relevant for today is to just know that I am one of the Kirkpatrick affiliates and facilitators. I've been working with the Kirkpatricks on training evaluation for close to 15 years. Introducing a lot of people to the topic of evaluation, but also supporting a lot of different organizations, be it in education, government, NGO, corporate, to how can we really implement evaluation strategies. Also doing a lot of impact studies to kind of help them to really see whether their training investments are giving them the expected results. So that's a little bit about me. So as you can guess, on that chart, I would have been in pretty experienced, though I'm sure there's people out there who are even more experienced than me, but I really do love evaluation. Having a finance background, evaluation was actually kind of my stepping stone into the training industry. Before I even learned to design training programs, I learned about evaluation. And how did I learn about evaluation? Well, today I am not going to teach you the Kirkpatrick model in detail, but I want to use it as a backbone. And so I just want to make sure all of us have a very basic understanding of some of the language that I'll be using as we go through the 60 minutes together. And let me just kind of do a quick check in, and feel free to use the chat for that, just or giving me a thumbs up, any reaction. How many of you know about the Kirkpatrick model? How many of you have maybe kind of come across it before, at least read about it? How many of you are somewhat familiar with the 4 levels of the evaluation model? Yep. Okay. Some of you say no, yes. Hands up. Okay, great. And again, don't worry. You don't have to be experts on it. All we need to kind of know for today is that as I will be going through the session, I might be referring to level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, that we kind of have a basic understanding what we actually mean by that. And when you kind of just look at that, when we will be talking about how to evaluate level 4, what we mean by that is really kind of how can we evaluate the so-called results. We'll actually even talk about how we define them, which is really all about what are some of those results that actually occur as, kind of a result of the training initiative and the support and accountability package that goes along with it. At level 3, we really talk about how do we measure the desired behavioral change, the change in performance, the so-called application of the learning. At level 2, that's what we refer to as learning. This is where we measure whether the people who attended the training program actually obtained the required knowledge, skills, attitude, but also confidence and commitment. And at level 1, This is where we measure whether people actually responded favorably to the training event, they found it engaging, and most importantly, whether they found it relevant. That is really enough for you to understand about the model. If someone wants to know more about the actual model and how it works, I'm happy to send you some articles or other webinars as well, or to schedule a call with you and walk you through it. But for today, I just really want to make sure that if I all of a sudden start talking level 3, that you kind of remember, oh yeah, level 3 is that on the job application. Oh, level 4, those are those business KPIs, yeah, the kind of impact we want to see back, in the business. When we talk about level 1, we kind of talk about the reaction of our learners and so forth. Leaving this though a little bit up and just kind of digging a little bit into your experience, would you again like to either use the chat or use the annotate feature and tell me at the moment in your evaluation work, which of these levels are you currently evaluating for any of your training programs? Are you evaluating all of them? Are you just doing some of them? Up to which level are you currently evaluating? Ian kind of says level 3, B as well. Priscilla's 3, and I'm proud you say some 4, but because I know you can do some 4. I've seen you do it. Okay, a lot of 1 and 2. Great, we do see quite some 3 and 4s as well. Okay, just gonna give it a moment. So Jerry says also level 2 and 3. Others say some 3 and 4. Perfect. Great. Working on 4 now. Wonderful. Okay, so let me just kind of clear this again. So very often, and this is again, there's no right or wrong, but just to kind of give you a little bit of an idea where typically our industry stands as well, and it's kind of also maybe what motivated me to put together this webinar is very often when you kind of look at where companies are spending their evaluation budget, you do see that there's kind of a nice little pattern to kind of see where they're putting their efforts. We can see that pretty much a big chunk of organizations are spending a lot of efforts and resources on evaluating the earlier called out level 1. So kind of really paying attention to learners' reaction to a program. There's almost an equal amount of resources going into level 2, and then it kind of starts dropping. So a little bit different, we kind of heard you, a lot of you actually share with us that you are, doing level 3 and kind of starting on level 4. Overall, in a lot of the research that's being done in our industry, we kind of see that there's quite a big chunk of evaluation budgets going into level 1 and 2, but then it starts dropping. Yeah, I know, Ian. I was very surprised as well when I saw this the first time, because a lot of the older research suggested that level 3 is actually much lower. Now, what we need to remember though, Ian, and that's a little bit the tricky piece about this study by Bodyho and Jones in 16, this is where the evaluation budget goes. That doesn't actually mean we are successful with it. Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily mean we're actually doing it right. But it's at least great to see, I think, from earlier studies where I remember some study from ATD in, I think, 2008 that actually spoke about only 7 to 9% of organizations evaluating level 3. But again, it's kind of difficult to fully compare those two studies because one study was more about, are you actually doing it successfully? And the other one, this one is more about where does your evaluation budget go? And so I'm still pretty happy to see that more and more organizations are really starting to think about how can we evaluate level 3 and 4 and starting to see this as important. However, in a lot of my work with the Kirkpatricks, but also at the Institute of Transfer Effectiveness, where we really focus on level 3, we still see a lot of our customers and clients struggling with actually doing it in a resource-friendly, efficient, and effective way. And I guess, yeah, so that's where those numbers are coming from. So this is a little bit kind of what motivated me to kind of think about, okay, what are maybe a couple of easy ways to help us do level 4 and level 3 get started with it, do it effectively and efficiently, but also how can we maybe rethink the lower levels of level 1 and 2 to maybe possibly free up resources that we can actually use for the higher levels. Because one of the key reasons I hear very often companies tell me why they're not able to do level 3 and 4 as desired, we are lacking resources. But then when I look at how much they evaluate at level 1 and 2, I think there might be an opportunity to re-engineer some of that and just reallocate resources. But let me not jump ahead. Let me actually go step by step and share with you now some of my tips, principles, and tools for a so-called more purposeful approach to evaluation that allows us to evaluate across the 4 levels in an effective way. So what we're going to talk about now is 3 little things. The first one is starting with clear goals. Second, we're going to talk about creating transfer-oriented evaluation forms. And then thirdly, we're going to talk about how to leverage the power of so-called formative evaluation methods. Now, again, please understand there's a lot more to evaluation than just those 3 principles. But in a short 60-minute webinar, those are 3 hopefully very tangible things I can give you that you can straight away also start implementing. So let's go into the first one. Start with clear goals. And now some of you, Prabha, and I think also Priscilla or Jerry, you got to be a little bit quiet on this next activity because I think you might have seen that. Yeah. So you can play along, but we'll kind of leave it to the others to accompany us on this journey. So here I brought you a selection of goals for a so-called sales training that I collected on the internet from very renowned institutes that offer sales training. And I'd like you to tell me, what do you think about those goals? Are those clear goals or not? Sanyam says they are not smart goals. Okay. Agree, not smart. Let's see, not quantifiable or measurable. Yeah, absolutely. And this is very often actually where the challenge with evaluation starts. Very often we think evaluation is something that comes after we've run a program, but actually evaluation starts before a program is even designed. Yeah, so when you kind of think about the 4 levels of Kirkpatrick, a key message is you got to start with level 4 in mind and actually define that so that you can afterwards evaluate it. Because just ask yourself, how can you ask whether you've arrived at the desired end destination if you actually don't know where you're going? If you've not defined your desired results, if you've not clearly defined your level 3 behaviors, how can you actually later on measure them? You gotta first define that. Yeah, and absolutely, Ian, none of them are targeted or anchored to a behavior. They're very vague. They leave a lot of room for interpretation. And hence, when we kind of define training goals like this, it's almost impossible afterwards to come up with a good evaluation strategy. Now, how can we do this differently? But also, why is this so important? I want to take you on a very, very brief experiment. Just imagine very briefly that after attending today's session, you're going to go back to your desk and there is a beautiful email that pops up on your screen and it says, oh my God, you have won a trip to the sea. Yeah, you have actually won a trip to the sea. Only catch is you only have a couple of minutes time to pack your bag and get to the airport to travel to your destination. So what are you going to do? You quickly grab a suitcase, you go home, you put maybe a bathing suit inside, some sunscreen, some flip-flops, maybe some sunglasses, and then off you go to your plane. A couple of hours, you land here. And oh my God, perfect. You packed exactly the right stuff into your suitcase. The swimsuits, your sunglasses, the sunscreen is just what you need to have a great time at this beach. But you know what? Sabine said, no, I would, you would ask where you're going. Absolutely. Of course, you already got it, Sabine. That's exactly what we need to do. Because guess what? Maybe the plane took you here. Well, you can still maybe use your bathing suit, the sunscreen, but you might actually also kind of need some other things to kind of have a good holiday here. Maybe the plane actually took you here to the sea. Well, that's why it's going to be pretty windy, and maybe just that bathing suit and sunscreen is not going to be enough. Latest, when you land here, you know that you've packed the wrong stuff into your suitcase because you're going to be freezing with those penguins. And that's exactly what happens if we don't clarify the actual desired goals and outcomes of a training intervention. If we don't start with clear goals, we have no basis for afterwards evaluating whether we reached it. But more importantly, we might actually also pack the completely wrong stuff into a training, from a design perspective, because we never clarified where the destination is actually going. So, my first kind of tip to make training evaluation work is training evaluation and effective training start with really, really clear goals. We got to slow down with our stakeholders and clarify where are we actually going. That will then make evaluation, especially at level 4 and 3, so much easier. Now, some of you might now be wondering, oh, come on, Melanie, that sounds great, but show us how to do that. Well, here you go. I am introducing to you or sharing with you one of my favorite tools, the so-called goal canvas, that I use with my clients to work out the so-called goals at level 4 and level 3 that can then be the basis for my evaluation strategy. Let's do this together. Yeah, it's going to get interactive in a moment. I'm just going to quickly demo this to you, and then you'll get a chance to do that for one of your own programs. This is a very simple canvas that looks at 3 areas and kind of helps us to have a conversation with our stakeholders and capture relevant information that then in a second step allow us to clearly define level 4 results and level 3 transfer goals behaviors. So let's imagine sales training, and this is a real case. Yeah, so this is a case where I had someone come to me and ask me for sales training. Now, in my past career, I used to do a lot of sales training. That's where I started my career. Now, it would be a very easy thing for me to just say, okay, great, you need sales training. How many people? What's the duration? I got some really good ready made trainings available, and off you go. No, that's exactly what we want to avoid if we want to start with the end in mind. We want to slow down and first clarify what's really behind this request. So here I went and I had a conversation with the managing director who told me, well, Melanie, we really need this training because our sales volume has really taken a hit. It's been really constantly going down. And I'm really hoping that as a result of this, initiative, and of course, other factors as well, that over time, you're going to slowly see sales revenue go up again, ideally actually go up by about 20% so that we get it back to the previous level. We kind of talked a little bit more. He shared some other stuff, but those were some key things the managing director shared. I then also had a conversation with the sales manager who's directly responsible for the people that they wanted to train. And I asked him, dear sales manager, what's going on for you? Why do you think we need this training? He says, well, our closure rate is really low and everyone is putting pressure on us to close more deals. It's taking for ages to close deals. We have quite a lot of leads and proposals out there, but somehow our sales team is not closing them. Okay, what else is going on? Well, over the last 1 or 2 years, we've also had quite an important retirement wave. We lost a lot of good old salespeople because they retired. We now have a very young, dedicated team, but they lack experience. And I'm just taking notes. Then he said, and I actually also think, they're pretty unskilled in closing sales. They lack techniques. They lack techniques on how you actually close deals. Then I asked him, is there anything else that you feel, when you kind of think about what the people that were very good at closing deals were doing differently? What do you kind of observe? And he shared with me, well, one thing I also see that's happening is that our salespeople, they're not really following up on proposals. So they're submitting a lot of proposals, But then these proposals are just laying with the client and no one is picking up the phone or writing an email to follow up. And right now, I'm just listening and I'm just taking notes. Then I said, okay, can I please also speak to the sales team? Because in the end of the day, I also want to talk to the people that are going to attend the training and understand their expectations. And as I talked to them and kind of asked them how they feel about it, they shared with me that what was very important to them is that they really wanted a training that was highly practical because they felt themselves they were not confident and skilled enough in closing deals. So they themselves said, we are very eager to go out there and sell, but we've never really had any formal training and we are kind of lacking some of those skills. So now over to you. This is the first step where, as part of the conversation, I'm just kind of trying to understand the business need, gather stakeholder expectations, as many things as possible to understand what my different stakeholders are expecting from this program. Now I can move into defining the goals. First of all, the business impact, the level 4 results, where I can ask myself the simple question based on the information that the stakeholders shared with me, which KPIs and strategic objectives should this program have a positive impact on? Now, I'm going to give that over to you. Feel free to either use the annotate, come off mute, or use the chat. Based on the information we've gathered in our stakeholder meetings, what do you think could be possible KPIs and strategic objectives that we probably want to pay attention to and include in our evaluation strategy? Someone wants to write, you got to kind of just use the annotate and move to the kind of pen instead of the stamp. Yeah. So once we have revenue coming in, we have an increase in the follow-up rate, yeah, the closing rate, yeah, absolutely, the follow-up rate. Of course, also the actual sales volume, yeah, sales volume and closer rates, absolutely, yeah. Just gonna give you another moment to look at that. Very nice. Absolutely, yeah, yeah. Okay. Okay, so some of the ones that are now coming in, such as having the confidence, having the skills, those are probably not business KPIs. That's actually where we're kind of going to go further down again to that level 2, where we talk about, do they actually have the skills? Do they have the confidence? Here, when we actually talk about level 4 and defining it so that we can measure it after, we are really kind of looking at in the business. Yeah, what are those strategic objectives that the business cares about that as a result of our intervention should actually get impacted? Uh, okay, here we're already starting to talk about how we can do that. Uh, I mean, we could, of course, talk about customer satisfaction, but again, what's really important is that we kind of orient ourselves at the stakeholder expectations because that's what they care about. They didn't really talk a lot about customer satisfaction. Their challenge was really more about closing rates, the follow-up aspect. So I think that's where you will see it's we want to stick as closely to what our stakeholders have actually shared with us. So what we kind of came up here with is on the one hand, sales volume, closure rate, and they called it the customer contact after sales pitch. Yeah, so this is that follow-up rate that you refer to, whether they actually are picking up that phone and following up. Now, let's think about the level 3 transfer goals and the critical behaviors. Again, based on what we've gathered in the conversation with the stakeholders, we should now be able to actually clearly define what should the participants do specifically differently in their work to achieve the desired result. again, take a look at what we've gathered in the stakeholder expectations. And feel free to share in the chat or again through the annotate. How would you define the so-called transfer goals? That level 3 behavior, what is it that we want our participants to do differently back at their work? Give a moment to think about that. Mhm. It's very important when you kind of define the actual success behavior transfer goal. We want to make sure we describe this in a very specific, observable, and measurable way. Yeah, this is not just about being able to do something that's at the lower level. This is actually doing something that will have a positive impact on these KPIs that we have defined up here. Yeah. So I see quite a few outcomes as well, but what we want here is an actual behavior. You got to imagine if you are walking in, yeah, you're walking into, for example, a sales meeting and you're having a video camera. What would you be seeing this person do that actually helps them, achieve those desired results? A good transfer goal can be captured on video. Yeah, it's very, very observable. Yeah. Okay, so we're again, I'm seeing some good stuff coming in. And again, don't worry. So I'm going to just close this and I'll show you what we've defined. Yeah. When talking clients commit to a follow up, yeah, goes already into a very good direction as well. So let me just close. Kind of uh, yeah, so I can show you the ones we have. So what we kind of came up with is one is that they actually use the closing techniques in their conversations. So level 2 would just be that they know the closing techniques. At level 3 now, transfer goals is we actually want them to use it. And of course, if one of us goes into a sales meeting, we can actually see that. We can have dedicated observers for that. And the other one is that what we also want them, remember, we had this issue with the follow up, that we actually want them after each proposal to follow up with a phone call. We could make this even more specific by adding a certain time period, that they actually follow up with a phone call within, let's say, 1 week max, if that's a realistic time frame, depending on the kind of sales we are dealing with. Because then, of course, we can actually pay attention to that, whether it happens. Now, when we kind of define these transfer goals, what's again very important is we don't want to have too many because then it becomes very hard to actually evaluate level 3. We just want to boil it down to the 2, 3 really crucial things that we want people to do differently as a result of having attended the program. We are not yet worrying about what they need to know to do that, what skills they need. That all comes much later at the lower levels. Right now, it's really just back at the work. And if you do a good job in identifying the business need on the left side of the goal canvas, as you can see, the right side is just a copy paste. It's actually pretty straightforward, just copying it over. Now, if you wonder how to get there, and Errol, have you sent an email to everyone or can you share it in the chat? We actually have a little template to you, a little transfer support, how to fill up this goal canvas. And we have here included some of our favorite questions that we use to actually have these conversations with the stakeholders to help us define, on the one hand, the business need, on the other hand, the business impact, or on the other hand, the transfer goals. Yeah. So we'll get into how we actually evaluate it afterwards. But again, if it's already clearly defined, evaluating it afterwards becomes a lot easier. And I'll show you examples for that. But the most important, in my experience, the reason why we actually struggle evaluating level 4 and level 3 is because we've never properly defined it. If it's not properly defined, it's actually, very hard afterwards to measure it, because how can we measure what we don't know that we want to measure? Yeah. Afterwards, they are actually at these levels pretty straightforward techniques, such as dedicated observers, but also surveys and other methods that we can use. Yeah. But what I would like you now to do is, just for a moment, is actually to just give you a little bit of a opportunity to apply the goal canvas to one of your own training requests. Yeah. So I'm always a big believer in not only consuming information, but straight away getting your hands a little dirty. So I know this might now going to be a little bit awkward, but I'm actually going to give you 5 minutes of just a little bit of silent reflection time to open up the goal canvas, the template, and maybe think about a training, yeah, that either, that you're currently working on, that you currently want to evaluate, and see whether you can actually fill out the goal canvas, whether you actually are clear on the stakeholder needs and expectations, the business results, and the transfer goals. If that's too hard, just use these couple of minutes to take a look at some of those impulse questions, those questions that can help us have those important conversations with stakeholders, and see which of these questions do you maybe want to start using in the future, that you kind of feel they might actually be very beneficial. Yeah? So I'm just going to give you a couple of moments to actually try this out by yourself, before I'll then show you, once we've defined that, how can we now actually evaluate whether it happened. So Ian, if you mean whether you can write questions for me, absolutely. If there's questions you have, you can always put them into the chat. You can also add your own questions, if that's what you meant. Whether you have other ideas for good questions to have those conversations, feel free. The idea just is to give you just a couple of minutes to just kind of try this out. Yeah. So on the template, you would actually kind of see whether you already have the answer to the impulse questions. So kind of thinking about a specific case where you're kind of currently working on, or a case from the past, where you ask yourself, okay, what do I know about the business need here? And based on that, what could have been the business results and the actual behavior? Okay. Well, of course, in the real world, this is not something that you would be hopefully doing alone. As you've probably guessed, this is something you need to do together with stakeholders. And so before we go into the second principle, which is actually now building on the goal canvas, because once we have the goal canvas, it actually becomes a lot easier to create so-called transfer-oriented surveys or interview guides and evaluation methods. Let me though just do a quick little check-in. What is your initial reaction to the goal canvas as a tool? Useful, easy to use? What are some of your initial reaction to either, to the goal canvas, some of those impulse questions? How do you feel how this might actually help you define those higher levels a little bit more clearly? Yeah. Yeah, that's been, I mean, my experience as well, Ian. What I felt is it was just a very simple overview for me when I'm in meeting to take notes. It really helps you, as Priscilla says, to kind of streamline the conversation. And what's really nice is you can actually sign off on that with your, with your stakeholders. Say, okay, can we agree that this is the why behind the training, what we are trying to achieve. And now, what really helps is once you've defined that, what you can now actually do is you can create so called transfer oriented evaluation forms. Now, there was someone, I think was it Purnima, who asked a little bit about how do we actually evaluate these behaviors. And again, there are many, many different ways. Observation is one of the most typical ways to observe level 3, be it supervisors, but it could also be mystery shoppers. It kind of depends which industry you are in. I used to do a mystery observers for hotels and restaurants to kind of see whether certain behaviors were in place as a student. You can have surveys as well. My advice in general is always, if you want to have as unbiased as possible data, use multiple sources. Only relying on supervisors might be biased. Only relying on the participants can be biased. So at Kirkpatrick, we always try and say to use a blended approach, which is, multiple sources and multiple formats. One of the methods, and again, don't think this is the only method, but one way to at least get started with level 3 and level 4 evaluation is actually to take something that typically already exists in any organization and improve it. I mean, let me just ask you, how many of you do use some sort of survey at the end of a training program to gather feedback? If you just show me your hands, either or in the chat me or just kind of virtually. Yeah. Surveys are still one of the most common used evaluation methods. However, very often when I look at surveys, there's a lot of, lost potential in them, meaning they're underutilized. They very often include a lot of questions around so-called level 1 and level 2. But actually, what we can do is we can re-engineer these surveys into something that starts giving us an indication about the higher levels. What do I mean by that? And don't worry, I'll send this to you after the program so you can use it. But this is, for example, a very simple transfer focus evaluation form that you can use right at the end of the program. So instead of asking a lot of questions about whether participants like the program, whether they were engaged, whether they like the venue and all that stuff, that's really just at level 1. You can actually start including questions linked to the earlier defined goal canvas. So what you can see here is, for example, question around C here, where we can ask people at the end of a program, how confident are you that you will be able to apply what you've learned back on the job? We could make this even more specific, asking them, how confident are you that you will use the closing techniques in your upcoming customer interactions? How confident or committed are you to start following up with your clients after submitting a proposal? And we can start getting an idea whether our training program is going to actually have an impact. Now, this is no bulletproof data. This is no proof that it's actually going to happen. But evaluation is not just about saying job well done. Evaluation is about detecting possible barriers to application. It's about monitoring and adjusting. If I already right at the end of a program find out that the majority of the people scores very low on confidence and commitment, I know that probably I'm not going to see the desired level 3 and 4 because they're not confident, they're not committed to apply it. I then want to do root cause analysis, find out why that is the case. And you can see I have here some questions included where I can actually ask them to tell me what might have a negative impact on their confidence. And I can then kind of adjust that. I can also start including questions about possible business impact. Again, this is not a proof on it, but it starts helping me to see whether the training can possibly have the expected impact. So you can see again here, I have again a lot of those KPIs included that I have earlier identified in the goal canvas. Yeah, where I can ask them about do you think that as a result of having attended this training, are you going to see an impact in some of those important business areas, such as turnover, closure rate? Now, again, this is no proof it's going to happen. But when someone afterwards comes to you and say, hey, we are still not seeing any improvement in any of that, you at least can go back and say, maybe there's something else going on than just the training. Because after the training, people were very confident that this is going to happen. What else might be going on? Yeah. This is for immediately at the end of the program. So starting to replace some of those level 1 questions with more meaningful level 3 and level 4 questions to start gathering predictive data that is useful for me. But exactly as you said, Sabine, I don't want to stop there. I can then use the same survey format and go back, let's say 60 days later. That's another easy way to actually start gathering some useful data at those levels. So what you now see, for example, very similar survey with similar questions, but 60 days later, where I'm going to ask them about ranking and rating themselves on how much are they actually now using those transfer goals that we've defined. So I'm asking them now after the program, how are you using closing techniques? I'm also asking them how they would have rated themselves before. And that difference that I see now actually tells me whether any change has happened. And so you can see, again, I have the 2 critical behaviors included here. Very important. I don't want to ask that before the program, because very often people before the program, they don't know what they don't know. They might actually overestimate. Yeah. So you want to use this 60 days after, now that they know what good looks like, how would they have rated themselves before and how do they rate themselves now? That improvement will tell you whether your training actually contributed something. And what you can, of course, now also do, you can then also here in the business impact further down here, you can again ask that question about, by applying those behaviors, are you actually seeing a positive impact in some of those important areas that we have defined in the goal canvas, such as closure rate, turnover, customer contact? Again, as I said before, this is only one method. You probably want to combine that with maybe a similar survey or interviews with the managers. And of course, in the business impact area, you want to actually look at those data points as well. But again, this is one first simple way of how you can get started to gather some meaningful data at level 3 and level 4 by leveraging a tool that actually everyone is already using. Everyone is typically using surveys, but a lot of those surveys are just giving us a lot of data and not actually useful data and credible data. So, Andrea, I see your hand is up. Feel free before we'll then kind of sum this up, and I'll give you one last thought on how to do the lower levels as well.
Thank you. Just one question. This is something that I hadn't thought of, and I'm wondering. I do the evaluation with behaviors before and after the program, but I have done sending like this prior the session or prior a program. How do you assess yourself?
Yeah.
And I agree with you. Sometimes, like, yeah, I'm an ace at X, and then they come into the session like, oh no, actually, I completely underestimated my skills or something. So and I'm aware of that, but I'm wondering if you send it after the program, how honest or how, or not necessarily honest, but will I remember as a participant how I would have assessed myself in the past? So what's the trade-off there in your experience sending it beforehand and dealing with that the assessment might be not accurate versus the inaccuracy of assessing it post-program, but actually meaning pre-program?
Yeah, I mean, there's always a trade-off in everything. Yeah. So again, sending it beforehand has just a very different purpose. Sending it beforehand is
Yes.
more about creating a clarity of expectations and priming the participants on what are we going to be working on.
Yeah.
But I'm doing it 60 days later. Here now, I'm really trying to see whether there's been a shift. And yes, while people might not always remember, I've actually had, it's, if they really do not remember, that also means that probably they have not really been thinking about that. So then I have a pretty different problem again in my
Yeah.
overall approach. Typically, the data you collect, if you do get confusing responses, sometimes it also means you have to go back with interviews. So, for
Yeah.
example, if you actually realize that no one has given themselves any change in the behavior, I will not just leave it at that. Evaluation
Yes,
is not
yes,
just a
yes, yes.
one-time effort. You have to go back and have interviews. Then it just actually shows you that good evaluation always relies on multiple sources,
Yeah.
because that's how you can reduce, and the risk of biases, the risk of not getting everyone to respond, and actually getting a more accurate kind of perspective. Yeah.
Cool.
But
Yeah.
I mean, in the end of the day, our experience has been very positive with this, and especially in combination with manager observation
Yeah. Yeah.
and in combination of paying attention to the KPIs. Because as you can see, some of the KPIs we've defined here, they're very closely connected to the behavior. Like
Yes, yes, yes.
the behavior is about following up with customers, and the KPI is the follow-up rate. I
Yeah.
mean, because the challenge is when my KPIs are, for example, only turnover and revenue, it's very easy for the business to tell me, well, but yeah, how did your training really contribute to that? I mean, we all know it's not just training that contributes to, sales revenue. There's many other factors, but training had a part to play because training supported us in improving the follow-up rate. Through the follow-up rate, we saw an improvement in the closure rate, and that contributed potentially to a higher volume. And so it's not about trying to claim that we are responsible for 20%
Yes,
in
yes, yes, yes.
volume, but it's about showing that chain of how, because of behaviors taking place, those low-level KPIs started to change. Yeah,
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 perfect. I like it especially because of this survey fatigue. You send one
yeah,
before and then you send one after. So I'll try this out. Thank you for that.
yeah, 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 absolutely. So just to kind of add here, and then I'm going to go into the last piece, Sunil, it's not the timing that decides which level we are here evaluating. It's this survey, the way here it is designed, is not a level 1 survey anymore. Level 1 would only contain questions about reaction. Yeah. In this survey now, we're including so-called level 3 and level 4 questions, yeah, that we can use in combination of other forms to create a much more solid kind of evaluation data pool. Yeah. But speaking of those lower levels, just to kind of close us here, is what's very important to remember as well is doing level 3 and level 4 evaluation is time consuming. Yeah? Doing it right, observations and all of that, it is an ongoing mechanism. It's not just a one-time effort. Observations, focus groups, and even these surveys, it does take effort. And one thing that has really helped me in making that possible is to rethink the way I approach level 1 and level 2, and kind of start using so-called formative evaluation methods a lot more. Now, what do I mean by that? Let me actually ask you just very quickly, and feel free to add in the chat, when and how are you currently evaluating level 1 and 2? What are, and especially when, are you currently looking at measuring reaction and learning for any of your programs? Priscilla says after the session, yeah. Yeah, after the session, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, between sessions and after. Yeah. Yeah, and of course, there's a mix. I mean, we do see still quite a lot of people running, quite substantial level 1 and level 2 evaluations after a program. And again, don't get me wrong, there's not per se something fully wrong with that. But when you kind of think about the usefulness of some of this data, finding out whether someone responded favorably to a training at the end of the training, Well, yes, kind of useful to make changes for the next batch, but for that particular batch, it's too late. Finding out only at the end of the training whether they actually acquired the necessary skills or not. Well, if they didn't, the only thing that's left is to actually send them back and retrain. So the usefulness of a lot of level 1 and 2 data is actually during the program. And so one advice that I have is what I like to do is to kind of leverage so-called formative evaluation methods. Because finding out whether my participants find the training engaging or relevant during the program, as the program progresses, allows me to make changes in the moment and improve on that. If I only find out at the end of the program, it's almost too late. I can make changes for the next batch, but for that group, the train is gone. The same is with learning. There's a lot of things I can do during the training program, so-called, role plays and case studies and so forth. Mock presentations in the, let's say it's a presentation skills, right in the training, where I can gauge whether the learners are actually starting to develop those skills. If I'm doing a role play, let's say on coaching skills, and I see that everyone is totally struggling with it, well, maybe I want to pause right there and revisit some of the concepts and practice again versus just continuing with the plan in the training. Because if I only do kind of a knowledge skill test at the end of the training or even after, if I then find out that they actually didn't learn what they were supposed to learn, I pretty much only have one option, send them back into the training. Whereas if I find out during the training that they're not progressing the way I was hoping, I can actually make corrective actions right there. And I think that's just a little bit of a shift in the mindset that evaluation is not just about saying a job well done. Evaluation is about adjusting and monitoring at every level, finding early signs if we are on track to meeting expectations, and if not, adjust in the moment. If I realize that my training, after half a day, people say this is actually not relevant. All the examples you're sharing, Melanie, they're not relevant for us. Well, that's great to know because now in the second part of the training, I can adjust. Finding out at the end, well, yeah, for the next batch, but yeah. So what this does is, and that's really kind of what helped me overall with evaluation, I'm not saying only do formative, but think about maybe using formative methods a lot more, especially at level 1 and level 2. Typically, what this does is it reduces the resources you will need after the training for these levels, and you can reallocate those resources to do maybe more level 3 observation, level 3 support, sitting with the business stakeholders to monitor the KPIs, and so forth. Because very often a key barrier why we are not evaluating level 3 and 4 is not because we can't do it. Very often we are lacking the time and the resources because a lot of it goes into the earlier levels. Huh? Again, that's been my experience. I'll leave it to you to kind of reflect that, but feel free to kind of take a look at this list. Again, this is not a complete list. This is just a list of some of my favorite level 1 and level 2 formative, summative tools. And you can also see Ian says you love the pulse check. Yeah, I love pulse checks. And I think especially in longer training sessions, so important. But again, also just to remember, if we do a lot of pulse checks, maybe we can really scrap some of those satisfaction questions in our survey afterwards because we already paid attention to that during the actual program. Yeah, so feel free to think a moment. Are there any methods, tools, techniques mentioned here in this table where you say, actually, you know what? Maybe I should and could incorporate them into my evaluation strategy. Just give you a moment to think about it before we wrap it up. Great. So, with that, we are kind of at the end, and we'll just kind of leave you with this final question and reflection. Then I'll just open it up for questions, comments. I'm happy to stay back some additional time. Our objective today was not to answer all your questions about evaluation. For that, we have dedicated programs. That takes a lot more. But to just show you three simple things that we do with our clients to kind of be more purposeful in our approach, really making sure that we start with clear goals, clearly using the goal canvas, defining our desired level 4 and level 3, which then already helps us to really make sure we pack the right stuff in our training. But furthermore, we can use the goal canvas to kind of improve our surveys and making them more transfer oriented and start gathering level 3 and level 4 data through surveys as well. And then really thinking about how we can leverage the power of formative evaluation methods, doing a lot more in the room evaluation at level 1 and level 2, so that when participants are leaving the training room, I'm not worrying so much anymore about their reaction and their learning, but I can really shift my attention to what matters most, and that is whether they actually apply what they've learned. And so anything I show today, any of the templates, we will be sharing them with you as a follow-up. Absolutely. We'll send you the recording, we'll send you the goal canvas again, and we'll send you the transfer-oriented forms so that you can try them out. Don't use them the way it is. Remember, the one I showed you is for a specific program using specific transfer goals. You, of course, want to replace those questions with your own transfer goals and your own business results. Wonderful. So with that, I hope you got some food for thought, some things that you can get started with. If you have more questions, feel free to reach out to me either over LinkedIn, over email. Feel free to also just kind of come off mute now and ask me any questions you might have now as well. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone.